came up in the town I grew up in, southeastern BC, Cranbrook, where sightings in the area of the East Kootenays would be reported in the newspaper, very matter of fact, not made fun of. And then I ran into it again when I lived in the Queen Charlotte Islands for 2 years.
How so?
It was part of the Coconut Telegraph. So-and-so up by Tallel had one come into whatever, or the probably more through the Haida people at Skidegate.
How long ago was it? Like, when was that?
So that was the 76, 77 into 78. And both, matter of factually in the social situation it would be mentioned, or through the culture of the Haida people at Skidegate. There were stories passed down that had them told as real animals, real living beings, not even necessarily animals. But
What did you think when you first started hearing that? Did you buy that right away? Or
because I'd come from a town where it had been mentioned as part of the local news, I was not resistant to it. I took it in. Then when I was researching about places to look for jade, or where jade is and why is it there, I ran across a few stories about reports in places where there are jade. There are also reports of Sasquatch in the back of beyond in BC.
Is that through, like, the general public, or is that through First Nations that are...
That was online research.
Okay. Yeah.
So I'm taking up rock hounding, and we're interested in learning all about it. But the jade kept drawing me in, and BC jade, and what's it all about, and there was much to learn. Ran across reports, ran across the debate. So a report would be made in some site, or and this was 15 years ago online, and then there would be the comments and the people who would call fake, hoax, can't be, is not, you people are evil, and these very negative statements. That's what got me intrigued to read more, because why is there this big debate? I came along believing what I'd read in my local newspaper or heard when I lived in the Queen Charlottes. I wasn't aware or prepared for the debate, so that I kept reading to find out, well, who are the naysayers and what are they saying? Why are they saying? And read a lot more reports and started to get interested in it, and realized that it was something I could go to the forest and find out more about.
So, and you've been doing it for how long now?
Officially, with my first BFRO expedition was in 2008, so 10 years of expeditioning through those people and what I learned with them.
What do you think and what would you share with, if people are starting off? What was some of the frustrating stuff that you came into that you had to negotiate and navigate, that they need to be kind of helped out a bit with, maybe, if they're watching at home?
I remember being very reliant and vulnerable in the beginning, because I essentially knew nothing. I'd been outdoors person with my family and my husband over the years, but this part had not played a role in it. So once I started thinking about it more, and talking to people about what are they looking for, what kind of experiences have they had, through BFRO expedition, had excellent tracking education and events that really changed how I see and what I see, and what to look for initially. And when you look through a stand of trees and look on the ground ahead of you and in the banks, in the moist places, So, and that was education. That came in from talking to people that were doing it. And I went through the period where it was became popular to call blast and loud recordings played of crying babies and whale sounds, and all at a very high volume. The tree knocking and calling, it was important to be around it, but I developed my own feelings about it by seeing it and people who had been at it for a while, and this is what they did. But that never came comfortably to me.
Do you know why?
Because that's not how I behave in the forest. If I want to go and present myself in their space to Sasquatch who may live there, I want to do it fairly organically and just be present and not play any games or try any tricks or pretend I'm smarter than they, because they are, as I said earlier, supreme at what they do.
So do you think you know what they are? What's your thoughts on that?
My thoughts have evolved to the point where I will no longer call them creatures. I do feel they are people. And
how did you shift from that to the people perspective? And you're not just talking like a higher primate, you're actually talking...
I don't know if I'm talking higher primate.
Okay, yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
I'm not educated or honed in or focused on it. I just feel that they live as original people would before we got involved in all this nonsense.
Technology, you mean? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And they choose to do that. They may, I think they observe a lot of what we call the human race is doing out here in their space, but they have no need to engage, and that should be enough, and it is enough.
What was the first thing that when you were starting this and going through the process was there anything that you came across that just really thought, holy smokes, this is interesting? Something that made you buy a bit more of that you're on the right track in regards to your...
I know I had mind-expanding shifts when I first realized they swim. Well, of course they swim. But until then, it had not been part of the picture.
Right, yeah. And how did you come across that one? Because you were talking earlier about where we're located right now, for you guys at home. Where we're located right now is in the Sicamous Salmon Arm area. And there's huge lakes on both sides of us. And then you were talking about that little narrow area that we just drove through to get through here. How it's narrow enough for them to swim that distance. Is kind of the idea there, which I get it. And Thomas Seawood has mentioned that too, of how they would, at that northern part of Vancouver Island, could swim from that point where his research area is across to where the mainland is. Yeah, that narrowest point there. So. And
that is believed to happen at Harrison Lake as well. There's an island near what's called 20 Mile Point.
Right.
And there's a short kilometer, and enough activity to First Nations people that the area is hung with signs that indicate this is Sasquatch area and Sasquatch territory. But the first report that I read was near where I live in Kamloops, and it was called Red Lake, and it was duck hunters. And they had an experience out in their boat in the misty morning of whatever, I think in about the 70s, early 70s, or maybe late 60s. And one proceeded to swim on by, and they couldn't name it, but the description of this wet head that rose out of the water and the size of the shoulders and the activity, and just... I could see it in my area. I knew the lake. I knew, what... It seemed more real to me than reports from Florida or reports from the other corners of North America or the world.
So is that report on BFRO's website?
I believe it is.
Okay, cool.
And I think I even have it on saved in my laptop, because I tried to gather up the ones that were from nearby,
Right.
historically, from fairly reliable sources and reports.
And that lake we just came from, you and I and Corey, what was the name of that lake?
Heffley Lake.
Heffley Lake. And you were kind of talking about, that there had been a sighting that made you interested in that area. And I can
Yes.
see why you'd be interested in that area, especially with that hidden lake that took you a while to find.
Which I knew nothing about until
Right.
I started investigating the sighting that happened in last February.
Right. Could you share a little bit about that? You don't have to mention names. You may, first names would be kind of
Oh,
cool, and how you ended up kind of.
My younger daughter has kept up with where I'm at with my investigations and feigns interest whenever I have to tell her something. She listens till the end. She phoned me one day excited because she had just read on Facebook a fellow that she's known for 10 years, and I've certainly known of him that time. He's a musician, and they have played together and pretty good friends over the years. He went on Facebook when he got home from work at 12:30 in the morning.
And when was that?
Midnight.
What was
in
the
February
of 2018?
2018.
Okay,
yeah.
yeah. So just recently. Then.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not year yet.
Right.
And described what he saw. The young man was not a believer or anybody that was interested in it. He's grew up as a hunter with his dad, so every year he goes out to get on with that job. Lives beyond the Heffley Lake, towards Sun Peaks, and is not a totally uninformed person about the woods and being out there. So I took his very grounded description quite seriously, and by the time I got hold of him, he had made the report to the BFRO, where it lies waiting for someone to investigate. So I kind of pushed myself in the middle of that and took it upon myself to do follow-up investigation. And what that is vetting the story to find out, could it really have happened there and the way it was stated. And then it gets posted for the public to read. And when I got there and looked very closely at the area where he had seen the road crossing and in the night, in the winter, I found so much more interesting stuff to look at that I've been going back since my first trip up there was in April. Every 4 weeks or so I get up there and have another look around and see what's changed, and things are changing, and I found other signs within a few kilometers either way, and there's still lots left to look at. So
Any tracks?
yes, from about a 7-inch track, Fred Flintstone foot, in a roadside ditch, that I went back and looked at again. It was under a little bush, and it deteriorated over time, but it didn't.
Yeah.
It still was a footprint
Yeah,
every
yeah,
time I looked
yeah,
at it.
yeah,
And then I found a roadside path that is too steep for humans to travel up and down without clambering or sliding down on their rear end. You couldn't remain upright on it. And there are nice big flat footprints going both up and down, and the pattern of the prints changed from in the first 4 weeks, definitely. As the vegetation's growing in over the summer, it's harder to see what was so clear in the dusty dirt in this roadside bank. And it was about a 25 or 30 foot stretch that just told a great story and keeps me going back.
You had told me a story that came in one time that somebody had asked you to investigate, and you said that you felt you were over your head. Can you share that? Because I think a lot of people, you're going to at one point get into a situation when you're over your head.
It was the first investigation I was asked to do, and I was at the coast on an expedition when an experienced, long-time investigator mentioned that up in my area, which is a south central BC, Thompson Regional District, someone was inquiring about whether or not they may have Sasquatch in their small lakeside acreage. And following, within 2 days of that, was a report that they'd actually seen one on this property. So it was up near where I lived in BC, so would I go look? So yes, and I was excited to do it, and as I was driving there, I did have this small concern, and I knew it was a family situation I was going to, that they might think I was there to take it away for them. And
Yeah, I've been there. Yeah.
and that had never crossed my mind, but I thought,
Yeah.
oh, maybe they think I'm going to do something about this. But I could certainly go and find out, is it likely that that's what's going on? And when I got there, this family that had moved to this area recently, to a house that hadn't been lived in for 2 years, they were undertaking homeschooling. So everything was part of the day was an education. So going out into the forest where they had come from a dense population in the Lower Mainland to this rural lakeside area, there was a lot to learn. So they had scoured through this 5-acre patch that they were on and had some experiences with a herd of deer that came and gathered close to their house, and let them come and go as they wound their way through the deer to the vehicle and drove away and came back and back to the house. House slapping, like something banging on the house, like a hit and run. And tree leans and structures and rock arrangements that weren't there the day before. They had that all on board and were asking about it. They asked Sasquatch Canada, who said, we don't know if you have a Sasquatch. Go outside and take some pictures and show us what your area looks like, and we can have a discussion. And the young father went out with his oldest 8-year-old son with the camera in his hands to take pictures of his area when a Sasquatch, and he felt it was a female, walked out of a clearing, out of the forest into the clearing that was his septic field and driveway, and into the forest on the other side, making a chittering, chattering noise. And he has since drawn a sketch of what he saw. And they were in quite a state when I got there, because
What do you mean by that? Just
as
so.
a family, they had 4 young children, 8 and under. They had moved to this safe rural space where their life could be in a bit more control than it was in the Lower Mainland. And this is what they've come up with, and they didn't know how to react. Should we be fearful for the lives of our children,
Yeah.
ourselves, the property? What does this mean to us? And they were desperate for some information. All I could do was go along and look at what they're looking at, what they're seeing, and try to keep my face straight, because it was jaw-dropping to me on this first investigation. And I did feel like, oh, I might be in way over my head here. I had no idea I was going to find so much evidence in such a small space, along with the stories that they were telling of what had happened in 4 weeks since they'd moved there. And so I looked at that lake, and then I looked at all the other lakes that are along the highway, and realized that all sorts of interesting things go on, and there's so many lakes in the area that there's some question about whether they connect underground somehow. So the mystery just kept growing bigger and bigger, and I made a few trips up. We did some recording with game cam and vocals. I mean, digital recorders. The game cam certainly showed us game and a few other interesting anomalies that could not be explained.
Right.
Yeah, and then the winter came. It was late October, the last trip I took up, and the young father said, oh, the snow's going to come and then we're going to see the footprints. And I said, and I don't even know why, but with some assurity, when the snow comes, I bet the activity stops. And it did, that winter.
So on that, I kind of think this is kind of important to add. I've had people contact me. I have one that's very similar to that story you just shared with me. But the end of it, sometimes when you're doing investigations, there's an abruptness to the end of the contact of the witness. Do you want to just share, not the details because you shared that stuff and I think that should stay private, but just about how that happened?
I felt we were under a bit of a process for investigation. He had a game cam, I had a game cam. He was interested, seemed to be interested in it all. And then I called a few months later, and there were still some pieces of equipment of mine in his area, and he said he would mail me the equipment. This is what you're asking about?
Yeah.
Mail me the equipment, and would I please not come again? And he was very polite. There was no anger in him, but it left me wondering immediately what had I done to bring what I felt was a developing relationship to an end.
Yep.
And of course I agreed, and he did mail me the equipment promptly, and so that's where that investigation ends. Now, I know the area is rich and rife with things, but it is 2 hours away.
Right.
So,
well, the only reason, Maureen, I mentioned that is it's very common if you're out researching and doing Bigfoot that something's going to come in and then the person's going to double guess themselves in regards to reaching out. And it's not anything that we have done, really, because I agree with you, too, like that contact that I had where they were just keen, wanted lots of information, and all of a sudden this wall came down. And even though you were reassuring them, I'm not interested in coming on your property, I'm not interested unless you invite me there, I'm not interested in letting anyone know about this, your names or anything like that. And I've come across over and over again, as much as people think that people will readily talk about this, they are not going to readily talk about this. No. Even that report that you and I and Corey were invited to check out with that one up in, sorry, what was the lake again?
Heffley.
And Heffley.
Right. Yes.
You know, the same thing again.
Yeah.
At the end of that, this abrupt, I don't want to talk about this anymore.
The young man that had the sighting, I have seen socially on a few occasions, and I did call him back after I'd been up there and said, yep, it looks like there's something going on. And did he want me to, keep him informed? And no, he didn't really want that at all. And when
I think a lot of people want to just move on, after the initial shock of it, after they know they've shared it with somebody, so they're not alone with it anymore. Right. We carry it for them, which helps them let it go, because they just want to kind of move on, right? Who wants to talk about this stuff? And that's exactly the feeling I got,
was that there was no pause with interest. He wasn't sort of all of a sudden enamored with this topic.
Yep.
Anywhere near the passion I have.
yeah, totally,
But it was done.
So when you look at you've been in it for a while, and Thomas Steenberg talked about. I asked him, "Is this addicting?" And he says, "Yeah, it's 100% addicting, and it is 100% addicting." And people should slow their process down. Major big decisions, wait after a year and a half after you've kind of gotten into it and you've got the rhythm of it. But if again, my channel's for beginners, and you're talking to beginners, and what is some strategy that you would be fair to share with people starting off, do you think? Besides, don't jump the gun. I love how you and both Corey, because I watch you guys, and you're both BFRO researchers, watch you guys on how you negotiate and navigate. You're trying to be exceptionally fair about what you're seeing. You're not coming right out and saying that's Sasquatch kind of stuff. You try to be open-minded about all schools of thought in regards to the topic. Here, just pretend we had Joe Blow sitting here and he was listening in, and he thought, man, I'd be kind of interested in this. What do you think you'd say to him or her?
Oh, yeah. Be interested in it. I guess I would ask then, would you be interested in spending time in the forest, going go and see. Are you interested to go and see? Enough to go and see. And that doesn't have to be owning a Polaris Ranger, six-wheeled Ranger, and riding up and down mountain roads and over impossible terrain, which I really thought at one point was the only way I was going to ever have a chance. And at a time when I also really felt I was going to or needed to see one. And your view can evolve, surprisingly. And now I'm very much more a roadside rambler, and I know that an important part of what they do if they're traveling to and from water, up and down mountains, is they have to cross the man-made roads and trails and byways that we as human people have put in their space. So they have to get across them. And I'm having just loads of fun looking at how do they do that? What are the signs? Do tree structures mean anything when they're at the roadside? And can I find some patterns?
And where do you find most of your prints?
The prints I have found that have been satisfying to me have been in the roadside banks.
Right.
It's because it's held up to see.
Yeah.
And they've been more apparent and easier to find
Yes.
is in the roadside banks. Sometimes the bank's only this tall, sometimes the bank's 30 feet tall, and the potential is there. And especially if it comes down to the road they need to cross,
Yep.
and there's only certain places they're comfortable doing that, or there's a lot of places they aren't comfortable doing it. If they're going to end up in the lakeside residence compound that's walled and chain gated,
Yes.
they'd prefer to make their way more discreetly than that.
What about cautionary notes? What cautionary notes would you give new people?
I was early in the game. I don't do much overnight stuff unless I'm with people, and it's more the social event because I am small and weak and I cannot see in the dark. So I'm at such a disadvantage at night that I prefer night stuff to be more of a social event. The daytime is when my eyes can see, and that's when I have seen the evidence that leaves you scratching your head or thinking, how can this be possible? And so it's not necessary to be out there all night in the back of the farthest mountain you can find, and it's a lot closer to home.
So the caution, I don't know if it's a cautionary note or concept is
to
okay.
this can be done safely, and
So not above your
put
means?
yourself at risk.
Okay.
And if you're needing the adrenaline and want to be the risk takers, you can have that. But it's also doesn't have to be part of it. It can be very safe. It can be very, very controlled. But I've also moved to a new place in that seeing one is not my prime goal anymore. So I'm not out there to get a shot or
Okay.
have it on a camera.
So what's your prime goal now then?
To be out here learning about it. Just, oh my,
Yeah.
look at that.
Yeah.
Can't explain it, then just a nice place to be.
Yeah. Thanks, Maureen.
You're welcome.
That was really good.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, I had a great time with you for sure.
Echo Lake 2020.